Yeah. You were going to ruin my great record. Are you ready? Are you ready? Winter. Okay. Are we ready, people? Yes. It's 6. Okay. It's 6 and a little bit. On April 11th, I called to order the Earhart Planning Commission. We staff present is Chad and Garrett and Peter and Angelina is someplace here. Here's something. Okay. And commissioners are all present except for John. John has requested an absence request. You've seen that. Do I have a motion to excuse John?
So what if we say no?
And you can do that.
So you get kicked off for talking to me.
Sorry. It's a good question. It's happened. As Jack said, it's happened before. There's some people that chose one where just come and what every so often, and then we say, hey, you need to be here more often than every so often. So let's try this again. Skip that, Angelina. Do I have a motion?
Doing so moved.
Judy has moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Paulina has second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. All right, we'll go ahead with that. Thank you. We have a consent agenda. We have the minutes, financial report, and no correspondence. You were given a corrected minutes. There are still errors in it. Paulina, bless her heart, went through and read it much more carefully than I did. So like on page 4, words, they're trees, not priests. We don't know why it came out as a priest.
Page 4 and page 5.
Page 4, page 5, and Angelina has been given these corrections. So she knows that she has been out sick. Oh. So that being said, if Angelina, wherever you are, could give.
I'm here.
Can you put in the corrections that Paulina gave you and resend these out so they're correct?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, when you're well, I understand you're sick, so you need to take care of yourself. So that being said, with corrections to the minutes, yes, Eric.
There might be more.
There's a whole pile in there.
Right.
Rather than Paulina, I saw yours, but maybe you can quickly address.
I'll just quickly address them. On page 1, February 31st, under the consent agenda, February 29th. Moving on to page 4, third to the last paragraph, the city administrator or designee, not designating, may grant the removal of trees, not priests. And on the next line, dangerous condition for one required septic system emergency repair. If there's not a period or a comma and not emergency repair being a separate sentence. It's all one sentence.
I see.
Moving on to page 5 really quickly, designee again and priests again. The word is trees. On 3 paragraphs down from that, I believe rather than amendment is to present this to the city council, it should be perhaps the planner is to present this to the city council to send it back to them with changing in the wording. On the next line, that's
I
striking
think
that.
amendment is okay there.
Pardon?
I think she's saying that the amendment is to present this to the city council. That wasn't, no, that's not correct.
The amendment can't do any presenting.
Amendment is there.
Or is it to be presented to the city council?
I think that's what it was, no.
I think
Because-
either way, it needs to be.
Right, because below that, there's an outcome, amendment is denied. So I think the intent, the amendment.
I got you. And then, but there is that striking that, which didn't make sense to me. That one. I personally would move where we voted, the names down to opposed rather than 0 in favor of their names. And that is it.
Okay. So those are the corrections.
Unless there's more.
Unless there's more. As we know, our meeting, we have many motions and over so long. That being said, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda with the corrections to the minutes?
I so moved.
Eric has moved. Do I have a second? Sorry. Russ is seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. All right, moving on. Reports, staff. Chad, do you have anything to report to us today?
Not too much, Madam President. Commission, so we have a special council meeting coming up on the 16th. That's to discuss some of the representatives for hiring and helping us through the public safety building process that the city council is beginning again. So that will start again here pretty quickly. On the 20th, we have our Earth Day cleanup. So this is where the city sponsors through with the help and some sponsorship from Ecology. It's a kind of a free dump day for Deerheart. So we'll have the everything out to collect the garbage. We will not be taking hazardous waste or tires, but we will have an electronics bin as well. So that might be something that would be of interest to you. Currently, the city staff is working on a lot of different projects, but primarily we're working on the budget right now. And so we're working through that. We have our first budget committee meeting at 6 p.m. and Ms. Blaine is on that budget committee this year as well. So welcome to that group again. Welcome back. But the budget itself is looking pretty good. I will say that expenses are definitely increasing for the city of Deerheart. Things are getting tighter. Salaries and that, to keep up with what's happening in the environment is coming up as well. So things are getting a little bit tight, but the staff is doing a fantastic job through the budgeting process. So I haven't mentioned anything really big coming out of that. Short-term vacation rental revenue is still strong, although as of today we're down to 66 short-term vacation rentals out of the 90 or so that we had when we started. A lot of those are homes that weren't, as popular or as busy because they were off the beaten path, if you will. But the rest of them seem to be staying strong and have been contributing to the budget pretty well. That's all that I have for now.
All right, thank you. Angelina, do you have anything to report?
No, I just want to say I apologize for the minutes, you guys. It was kind of hard and hectic trying to redo all those changes after changes after changes for the motion.
Your excuse.
Agreed.
Garrett, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think just a quick update on the housing planning assistance grant project that City of Deerheart and other Clatsop County communities are participating in. The state of Oregon, DLCD, has finally approved a contract with a consultant that's going to be working with each of the cities to update their buildable lands inventories, assess housing needs, and develop a report on recommended next steps to improve housing supply across basically responding to whatever the needs are that are identified in the report. And so we're going to begin working with the consultant 3J, county staff, and the idea is to also be collaborating with the other cities and learning from each other throughout the process, starting with data in the coming weeks. So we're happy that that's moving forward, and this project is going to go from now until spring of 2025. So I'll provide you with an occasional update there when things get more interesting than they are at the moment. I think that's about it. We've been busy with a lot of inquiries, though not a ton of applications. We are expecting a new proposal for the elementary school to come in the coming months. We just had another pre-application conference for that this past month. And so we'll let you know when it's time to start considering that. That's it for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Peter, do you have anything?
Just that I'm working with staff on the population stuff, and I'll be working on the buildable lands inventory and kind of housing needs analysis. I've worked with 3J in other jurisdictions, and they're pretty responsive, and hopefully we can get a really accurate picture and ground truth everything and make sure that the community has a good numbers and a good understanding of where we're headed. And then I've been contacted by the attorney for the zone change applicant for the school. And it sounds like things are progressing. So I'm sure I'll be in touch with her in the future.
Anything else?
I don't think so. Chad and I were in mediation all day yesterday, which was so much fun. And it is kind of land use related, but hopefully we'll make more progress on that.
Okay, all right, thank you. The commissioners, do you have anything to report? No? I have a question for Chad. Did the city council get the minutes from the planning commission meeting in their last packet for city council?
I'm not sure.
Okay. We had discussed that, Chad and I, because whether you know or not, every month I write a letter to the city council about what went on, which means I'm sitting here taking minutes and everything else. I'm taking notes, and they don't make any sense to me when I go home anyway. So it was suggested that why don't we just give them a draft of the minutes, let them know that that is a draft of the minutes, but there's certainly going to be much more detail than anything that I'm going to write in a couple of paragraphs. So we're hoping to move that forward, and at some point, the president of the planning commission does need to write a letter because the city council members have the minutes, which would be far more detail, and they'd all get equal of it. Good idea.
I think what we talked, I do know for sure that they did not.
Okay.
But I think that we were talking about when to give that to them, and it was after the approval of the minutes from this group to next, or did you?
No, before, I was going to call it just a draft.
Okay.
They would know it's a draft, but it's better than what. I mean, I write 3-4 paragraphs, and I mean, like Peter said, he's working on population stuff. I go, okay. Sorry, Peter, that's what you said. I'm going population stuff. Okay, all right.
20.
Okay, visitors. Oh, I'm sorry, goals list. Do we have any corrections or additions? We have one item on there that maybe we could remove. That's the tree permitting process. How do we feel about that, group?
did the city council look at
They haven't
that?
done anything, but
We did our part.
We'll report back to you when we present the next steps to city council and have results for you.
okay, do we? I'm sorry, Garrett, do we need to leave it still on the goals list?
No, I don't think so.
Can we scratch it, Ruben?
Yeah.
Scratch it.
It's just like for a moral victory rather than.
This is a moral victory, yeah. Every so often we need moral victories.
Absolutely.
Are there any other additions or things that anyone's interested in or questions? Yes, Don.
I've talked to Chad a little bit about this, but the, ODOT City Highway 101 Safety Improvement Plan.
Yes.
Especially considering the light of like yesterday's incident on the highway, which I know was out of your heart, but still. What is the role of the planning commission in trying to quicken that pace up or speed that up or be involved with that? Or is there?
That's under the in process thing. So that kind of means it's with City Hall now.
That really comes down to funding. So you have to get in on there buying funding. And after we do the TSD and finish that plan, with the highway, we were put into that realm for funding. And so when things come up through ODOT and this project has been established in regards to, at least been planned out, then it becomes eligible for the grants. We just got information about a month ago that we were being considered as a finalist for a grant for the reconstruction of the lights and the Pacific 101 corridor. So anywhere from the lights to 5th Street to start that process. And they were going to award it to 4. We were number 4 on that process. And then when the cities came back to them with their grant requests and talked to them about the expenses and how they've changed and everything became more expensive, they wrote us out, gave the money that they were going to allocate to us, those other 3 projects. So we are in contention for these things. But the question is a good one. I don't know the exact process, so we are reaching out to ODOT to again get more information about where we're at with it. But I can't answer that right now.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on. Visitors' comments not related to the agenda. Anyone have something to say? No, I see shaking of heads. All right. So we are going to then open public hearing 24-02 for free removal application.
I'll move over here.
Okay. So I need to read this disclosure statement. Don Frank, because he is the applicant, has removed himself from the planning commission for this discussion. Okay. All right. All persons testifying shall be deemed parties to the application and must provide their name and full mailing address if they wish to be notified of the decision, continuances, appeals, or other procedural actions required by the code. The city zoning code specifies applicable criteria to be relied upon in making a decision. Those criteria findings of fact are in the city staff report. Public testimony should be limited to those criteria findings of fact or to other city or state land use standards that the person testifying fully apply to the proposed land use action. Failure to raise an issue in person or writing with sufficient detail to report the hearing body and parties to the hearing an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes appeal to the city council or land use board of appeals or to seek damages at circuit court due to a condition of approval. Before the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may ask the planning commission for an opportunity to present additional relevant evidence, arguments, or testimony as within the scope of the hearing. The hearing's body shall grant the request by scheduling a date to finish the hearing, a continuance to a time and date certain, or by leaving the record open for additional evidence, argument, or testimony pursuant to ORS 197.7636A through E. Do we need to declare a conflict of interest, any ex parte contact, or personal bias?
I did a site visit.
I did a site visit and talked to the owners for a while.
Okay, so that was Judy. Paulina first spoke and then Judy spoke.
I did a site
Russ.
drive-by visit.
Russ did a drive-by. I did a drive-by to Jenny.
I read the report, so.
Okay, all right.
I mean, field work.
Okay, so driving by and looking at them is certainly things we should be doing. Ask the audience, are there any challenges to the commission's ability to make an impartial decision? Hearing none. All right, Garrett, do you have a staff report for us?
Yes. So there's a staff report in your packet, and to summarize, the applicant removed 5 trees from the public right-of-way in front of 988 Summit Avenue, their house, back in January 2024, based on the recommendation of an arborist that the trees were posing a hazard, and that any sort of method less than removal would not be satisfactory for correcting the hazard. The arborist report, which was done last fall, also recommended evaluating several other trees at the same location in the future and consider removing those. So the applicant went ahead and had these trees removed in January of this year, and now would like to remove 5 more trees. So City of Gearhart zoning ordinance requires that when you remove more than 5 trees within a year, a tree removal permit is required, and that the planning commission decides upon it. And there's some specific criteria for you to base your decision upon, and the criteria are subjective, and so we have to basically make this decision like we do a conditional use permit, with an opportunity for public comment and a hearing, which is why we're doing this now. So again, the trees are located, the trees that the applicant wants to remove are located in the public right-of-way between Summit Avenue and the property boundary. If you're out there on Summit Avenue, it obviously just looks like it's on their property because there's no sidewalk or other clear property boundary delineators. And there is a public water line. I don't know the particular location of it, but my understanding is it's somewhere in the immediate vicinity of some of these trees. So we didn't get any staff comments. We didn't get any public comments before finishing the staff report, but we do have a public comment submitted by Sharon Knopfler that I'll address shortly. So getting into the findings of the staff report, the arborist report from last fall was a little bit ambiguous on the actual size of the trees, but of the 5 trees that were removed in January and the 5 trees that are proposed to be removed. But basically we're assuming right now, based on the information they did provide, that all of these trees are greater than 12 inches at 4.5 feet above the ground. And so they meet the definition of a tree. And when you cut down more than 5 of them in a year, you need this permit. The arborist report when they identified 5 hazard trees that posed a safety issue, they were referring to the 5 trees that were already removed. Okay, so there's not like an arborist finding in the record that the 5 trees that they now want to remove pose a safety issue. Staff, we've written in this report that removing more than 5 trees in a year requires the permit. And, my interpretation of this is that any of the 5 trees, if they're a safety issue, then they can be the ones that satisfy the hazard criteria. And so they could have removed the 5 trees that they want to remove now, back in December or in January without getting a permit. And then if they came to us and said, now these are the 5 trees we want to remove that are documented unequivocally as having a safety hazard, we'd say, yes, you meet the criteria for the 5 trees that you want to remove. Here's your permit. And so if you look at the criteria, necessity to remove trees which poses a safety hazard is one of the 4 conditions that you can meet in order to remove remove more than 5 trees. So my interpretation of this is that 5 trees maybe do or maybe don't meet that criteria, and 5 trees clearly do meet that criteria based on the arborist report. And so in that regard, the proposal overall for the number of trees they want to remove in this calendar year does meet the criteria of the zoning code. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about this. I mean, regarding Sharon Knopfler's comments, I think that she has some comments that are important considerations and questions, and I'm going to summarize them here for you. That she wanted the Planning Commission to know that the 5 trees that were removed in January, that removal was paid for by the city, and because it was in the right of way, and and her comment also says that the remaining 5 trees, the removal of those will be paid for by the city. And she wants to know if it sets a precedent, and can any property owner come to the city and demand city action or payment for a situation where the property owner thinks that their trees are unsatisfactory. And if the city declines to act on the Frank's request, does it set up a LUBA appeal? Okay, I think these are all interesting questions and that we should talk about them as a planning commission, but I actually don't think that any of them address the approval criteria for making your decision on the tree removal permit. And so I just want to convey that. And I also look forward to discussing these questions anyway, but I don't think they should inform the decision on the permit because the criteria are pretty cut and dry. So in conclusion, I think the proposal meets the zoning code criteria and recommend that you approve it. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm confused because I could not see in the arborist's report a clear need to remove more than the 5 trees that have been removed, which posed a safety hazard. And that's the only criteria that I saw even fits. Which draws me to a different conclusion.
Sure. So yeah, I think it's a fair interpretation. If you want to decide on the application, just considering the next 5 trees that need to be removed, the next 5 trees that the applicant is proposing to remove, there is not a clear record that those propose a safety hazard. It's that the trees that were removed already did pose a safety hazard. And the idea in my mind is that I don't want an applicant who has some hazard trees and has some other trees that might not be a hazard to go through a process where they're trying to decide, like, should I really remove these hazard trees right away? Or should I wait and get planning commission approval to remove, 3, 4, or 5 hazard trees, because there's these other ones that I also think I might want to remove later, and planning commission won't let me remove them if I go ahead and proactively address this safety hazard right now that I have the knowledge and means to address. I'm not sure if that's clear or not. I think it's fair to interpret it the way that I think I heard you interpret it, which is that you just want to decide on whether the next 5 trees pose a safety hazard. And that's not the way I was reading the situation.
Thank you.
Anything else, Paulina?
I have to gather my thoughts for some.
Okay, Russ, you give some.
Well, I guess the basic question to me is, if it's city property, the city cut down the first batch of trees and they're gonna cut down the second batch, why are you guys here?
Why are we?
That's a correction I'd like to make. You have a moment.
That is the question that I posed to Garrett and Peter and Chad earlier this week, that if the city paid to take down and did actually taking down of the first trees, then why are we here? And does this ordinance apply to the city? I don't know if it only applies to individuals or to the city, but I didn't get an answer. So there's our questions.
All right. Well, I think that I'll take the opportunity to highlight some things. And one is and we'll need some interpretations too from you today. But one of them is, these trees are not per se on city property. They're within the city's right of way. So if these trees were in a park, in a city park, and they were a dangerous tree, then it would be very clear who's responsible for taking them down and how this should happen. Anytime we get an arborist report saying trees are dangerous, we're gonna try and be responsive because we want to keep everyone safe. It is not unusual, though, for property owners themselves to be responsible for whether it's the maintenance of a sidewalk in the public right of way or whether it's trees in the public right of way. And so this is one of the items that, I think it would be helpful to have some clarity from you as a planning commission on your interpretation. So the second one is, if a tree is a dangerous tree, so if it meets one of these criteria for outside of the 5, and I think this is what Garrett was getting at, does it count? So do you count those 5 dangerous trees in the calculus and say they've already cut down 5 trees, so they can't cut down anymore without a special review? Or do you say those trees don't count because they fit into one of these carve outs? So like what he said was, his concern and the way he interpreted this was that if they want to cut down 10 trees and 5 of them are dangerous, then they could get an application to cut down the 5 non-dangerous trees. Then they could submit the arborist report that said the 5 dangerous trees were dangerous and get them cut down. So you've got like 6 on one hand and half a dozen on the other. So I think his point and his interpretation, that there are 2 ways to interpret this, is if a tree fits within a carve out, does it matter the order of the cutting? Or do we just not count those trees at all? The second would be, if the tree is in the city's right of way, who would the applicant be for the tree? Would it be the property owner or would it be the city? And then lastly, who should be responsible for the removal? And so those are all items where I think it would be helpful for us to get some clarification from all of you. Generally, and again, this is not just addressing right away, it's addressing streets as well. So the default rule in the state of Oregon is that property owners own to the center line. Then that's why when we do a street vacation, the street goes back, one half of each street in normal circumstances goes back to each property owner. So we have the ability to have a road in the public right of way. We have the ability to have a sidewalk, whether we've built it or not. It gives us certain rights, but that's different than us owning the title to the land. So that is a difference that I would highlight between the city right of way and say a tree in a city park. I think that Garrett's interpretation as far as the how to count trees, that's certainly a reasonable interpretation under the code. I also understand interpretation that would say we're counting trees. And so, you know, as I learned recently from Luba, city staff is not granted any deference in our interpretations. We really do have to come to these, whether it's the planning commission or city council, to get your interpretation because you are entitled to deference. So those are the items that I think if we can get some agreement on, that will help us moving forward. And then it will also help us know when to bring you these sort of applications and when not to. And so that's not just for this application, that's for future applications as well, so that we'll have some clarity on what to bring and what not to bring.
Oh. Yes, Eric.
I'll ask one question with regard to who's responsible here, the landowner or the city. Let's say we knew, I'll pose this mostly to Peter, I think. Let's say we knew that the tree was actually a danger. There's some, whether the city or the land or the property owner had queried a arborist because it looked dangerous. And so now we have a report, but something hadn't yet been done. And then there was some property damage to somebody's personal property. Somebody parked a car there and the tree fell on the car. Who is that car owner going to hold responsible for this? Whose insurance is going to pay for that? The cities or the property owners?
That is a very good question. And it is a very timely question because I have a feeling that soon we'll find out. Cities generally have broad sovereign immunity to protect us from lawsuits, whether it's because somebody tripped and fell or what have you. The most recent, I'll say, like bad ice and windstorm in the city of Portland, there were a lot of trees that came down during that storm. And some of those trees, both within the city of Portland, as well as in adjacent cities such as like Oswego, people had gone to get tree cutting permits with arborist reports saying, this is my understanding, I've heard it anecdotally, I believe it to be true, that those cities, despite having the arborist report, said that those individuals couldn't cut down the trees. So are those cities, and again, anecdotally, I heard that a tree that Lake Oswego had not done a permit for landed on someone's house that lived on the lake and basically demolished the house. So given that they were willing to, they wanted to cut it down, they had evidence that it was dangerous, and the city said no, does that open liability for the city? And I would say maybe. I would be very concerned that the fact that they wanted to remove the tree and the city said no, puts the city on the hook. when we were looking at this tree ordinance at the city council, and I talked to them about this a couple months ago, one of the things that I said is what would help insulate the city from liability is if let's say there's a tree in the right of way, because I don't think we have, let's say every tree in our right of way was dangerous. I don't think the city has the financial resources to cut all of them down. So to help insulate us from liability, I would want the property owners to be able to cut down the tree. So we would give them a permit to cut it down, whether we could pay for it or not. So at least there will be an avenue of us trying to do something to correct that dangerous condition. So I think there are arguments that it would be the property owner who is responsible for the tree falling down if it's in the right of way, because in other contexts, such as sidewalks, the property owner is responsible. But, you know, ideally, we just could deal with these trees as they came up.
Can I ask another question? Is a right of way similar, have the same general legal parameters as an easement? Lots of properties have easements on them for this, that, and the other thing. Maybe a water line or a utility line. It's still the property owner's property, but they are giving easement that somebody else can cross it.
Right.
Like in this case, the right of way.
Right.
So that would make me think that if it's true that a right of way is like an easement, it really is the property owner's property. They're giving permission for somebody else to use it.
Correct.
And therefore anything on that property is the property owner's property. It's not the person who is gaining the right of way or the easement.
Right. So I think that yes. And that's why when we vacate a street, that the property returns to each adjacent property owner. They own to the center line, and then there is a variety of whether it's utility easement, road easement, right of ways, kind of shorthand for all of those items. And then when we're talking about an individual item that's maybe not necessarily in the street, such as a utility easement, that's to signal for us that that's for a limited specific purpose.
It seems to me this is the property owner's responsibility based on.
Okay, that's a discussion thing.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So we'll move on. Do we have any other questions for Garrett or Peter? Sorry. Oh.
Sorry. Clarify.
Yeah, Chad, you want to clarify something?
Yeah, during the report, Garrett was stating that the property owner was the one who cut down the first 5 trees. And that wasn't the case. I think some of you know, that was the city who cut down the first 5 trees. The property owner in this case, Mr. Frank, he came to the city prior to cutting any trees, believing that those were on his property. And he asked permission, wanted to make sure that he was doing things correctly. At that time, we figured out that those trees were actually on the city right of way and not on his property line. So at that time, he says, well, I've got this arborist report that he paid for. And it did say that these 5 trees were dangerous. And looking at them, they were quite unique in the way that they were growing. So I didn't have any reason to not believe this arborist. So at that point, the city took on the cutting, the stump grinding, and we paid to have those trees removed. Because I have a document that says they are dangerous, they are in the right of way, and it wasn't necessarily up to the homeowner. So just to clarify that. Also, the city in the past has decided, previous administrations have said that the city does not own any trees other than what's in our parks. That the trees that were planted in the right of ways were not planted, to my knowledge, I have not heard anything different, that none of the trees planted in the right of ways were planted by the city. with the exception of the cherry trees that you see up and down Pacific Way, and even some of those were planted without permission, should be common. But so we don't maintain any trees on the right of way. And it seems like the only time that we have any back and forth with owners is when the trees are dangerous or causing damage to a property. Then we try to alleviate that through pruning that we pay for or removal. It doesn't happen that often. So that's it.
And so who would pay for these trees if we approve the removal?
In my mind, the way that I think it would work best is that seeing as how the city, I mean, there's some nuance here, I don't want to get into a discussion, but seeing as how the city has no need to remove these trees necessarily, there is a problem. Underneath these trees, we have a water main. So if the city did plant trees, we wouldn't have planted them here because they're right on top of the water main and it could create some issues. But if it's an owner's request to cut down a tree and they want to get rid of it for various reasons, whatever that might be, I would say that would be the owner's responsibility to do. If somebody called and they said that this tree is dangerous, by eyeballing it, we really couldn't tell if it was dangerous, and they wanted to continue, I would make an offer to the homeowner to say, well, if you'd like to pay for an arborist, if it was obvious, we would take care of it. If there was a split crack, something going on that made it look dangerous, we would take care of it. But if it wasn't evident and it was something that they really felt passionate about, we would ask them to hire an arborist and provide us with that report.
Okay. So Ian has reminded me of another question for someone there. These trees are planted 5 feet off the street. I'm horrible with those. About 5 feet.
About.
Okay. In other places, you have to have fences and those kind of things further back off the street. Is this a safety hazard for people pulling in and out of their driveway? Is there anything about that you can't have something like that growing that close to the road that would block views?
It could be. There's definitely no parking in front of that area where these trees are located.
Right, but there's traffic.
There is traffic. The trees are pretty well limbed up, which I think is part of the problem, which has made them dangerous, as well as the way that they were pruned. I think that there might be, and I think that would be best for the applicant to discuss if there's any hazards. The hazard that I see is that these are potentially dangerous trees because the arborist recommended reviewing them over time. And also that they're over our water line that you don't like so much, but that does occur in other places around town as well. This isn't there, but.
Okay, all right. So I think we've heard from our staff on this. It is now a time for the applicant to speak. Please give your full name, your address, and your phone number.
I'm Don Frank, 988 Summit Avenue, 503-738-5118. This is my wife, Jenny Frank, also same address.
Same address.
Okay, should we sit down? I thought there was a podium.
You may sit
or
down,
something.
you may stand. We're very formal here, Mr. Frank.
Well, hello, the other side. And Russ, your moral victory of crossing it off, well, it's back. There was a lot of really good information from Peter and Garrett and Chad and everybody, and good questions and that kind of stuff too. I guess just some timeline. Those of you that did go visit the site, the house, our house, you kind of see those specific trees, and there's the photos in there and all of that stuff. So our house was built in 1997, and those trees were planted by the original homeowner on that where they are. So those trees were planted probably as they were 6, 7, 8 years old. So that makes them 30 plus years old. Kind of trees they are, I've had mixed reports on this. Some say they're non-native pine trees and nearing the end of their life expectancy. And I think that's part of the reason that that's one element of the danger. Those trees were topped at 8 feet, however many years ago. And you can tell that because the trunks practically stop and there's branches that come out on this side. And so not only this arborist, but I also had 2 other tree professionals talk with me about it and look at them. And those basically just kind of pull away from the trunk. And that's one of the potential hazards of anybody walking by, anybody parking there or driving by in that way. The trees, though, may be on the city right of way. The city has never maintained them. And I don't know if anybody's ever maintained them except honestly for topping them right there.
We've limbed a couple of things.
Right, for sure. And we've raked up a lot of pine needles and all that kind of stuff too, of course, and branches. When the 5 trees, the 5 hazardous trees, I think there was some really good discussions. And in my mind, the way I interpreted it is, okay, there's 5 hazardous trees. Those are like automatic that they have to go. And then as a homeowner, I'm allowed 5 trees, which wouldn't apply to those 5 trees. And that's kind of my initial interpretation. I started talking with Chad. We started talking with Chad about this in July. And part of the complication was that we realized they're not necessarily on our property and they are technically the city's trees. And so literally through our work on the planning commission, I realized that, well, there's actually a proper method to do this. And we're going to try to figure out how to do this through the right channels in that kind of way. The initial evaluation says that the trees should be reevaluated. The remaining trees should be reevaluated in 12 months from the date of this. Since then, I've had 2 other professionals out there and they've looked at the remaining trees and they're like, these are just exactly the same as the other trees. And they're even maybe potentially more dangerous now because 5 of those trees have been removed. And now the tree stand isn't so supporting of itself.
Protected.
And protected from especially the wind and or ice if that would happen out there. So that just makes them even more potentially dangerous. And then after that is when we learned that they're planted directly on the water main. And that's when both Chad and well, Jenny and I both were like, okay, now we got to kind of take a step back here and stuff. We can't just like push them over, you know, they have to actually be cut and then ground, the stumps ground down to make sure that the water main is not disturbed. And you guys who visited the site know that the street and where the trees are is a higher elevation that leads to Nacogdoches Creek, which our property line extends to the middle of that. So any water break is going to go straight down through that yard and the deck and potentially into the house. And that's, you know, as far as like the question of liability, I think that's definitely something that is a concern of ours. And so we're just trying to protect ourselves in that way by having these removed. Our findings in this whole process is that they potentially have damage to our property through their hazardous nature. They restricts the parking in that area. You know, you went driving down there and noticed there's actually there can be quite a bit of traffic, and I believe it's set up as a hammerhead so that fire trucks can come through and garbage trucks can come through and turn around and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, those trees are right in the way of those big rigs.
And they hit the limbs every time they go by. So there's constant pickup of debris and things that are coming down. You know, they have to, either the UPS driver or the garbage man, I mean, literally the way that they have to maneuver around those trees and then back into our driveway in order to avoid some of those things.
As I mentioned, we do have, our property goes through the middle of Nacogdoches Creek and I counted, and most of that area is obviously a riparian zone. But we have over 30 trees on our property. Like, we're rich in trees. And in fact, there's 3 little Japanese maples that are in the front by the driveway that are just, you know, shadowed out by these trees. And we would like those things to have an opportunity to grow and bloom. So, you know, that's just how we got to here. Now, you know, the order of how we did it, or you know, if we would have taken the free 5 trees first and then the hazardous trees, you know, plus the complication of who's responsible for it and all of that stuff. That is really kind of led to the challenge of trying to get this done. And we've talked with Chad and the city did hire someone to take the trees out, the first 5. And they did that. We would have done that anyway. As property owners. So through this process, I actually think, since if we're going to take 10 out, you know, the city is paid for half and we'll pay for the other half. And we actually also did pay for the arborist report. So we're invested into making this happen and go from there. Do you have any?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much straightforward. I mean, I think one of the biggest concerns is with the 5 that have already been removed. It compromises the integrity of the last 5 that are standing. And if, you know, we had a big windstorm, which happens on occasions, you know, if one of those, and I'm looking at some of these photos here and now, it's like you can kind of see that they're already kind of leaning. So if one were to go, it would, you know, potentially knock down another. And then if that affects the water line, then we're having gushing water that's, you know, we're all on a sand dune that's up there, right? All the sand's just going to wash away, and then, you know, our house is going to get moved, and that, you know, there could be some serious complications with that. So.
Yeah, and the city of Cannon Beach just had a water main break a week or so ago, and they had a boil your water alert for a couple, 3 days. You know, it's just all that stuff. It's, you know.
Yeah, then how does that affect the rest of the city if it were to break? You know what I mean?
So we also would agree to help mitigate this, is to plant 5 trees. I wrote 5 to 10 trees somewhere on our property at a future date once we get this part done and figure out how we want to proceed from there. So any questions?
Okay, thank you.
Oh. Okay.
Good for you.
Good. Yes, ma'am.
I don't have any questions for Frank. I don't see any questions.
Not right now.
Okay,
but-
so there are no questions. So you may move back.
Okay.
And are there any people here to speak that are proponents of this application? No proponents? Neutral? All right. With the applicants having nothing more to say, I close the public hearing. Now, Eric, would you like to discuss?
Well, if you want me to start, there's a lot of complicating factors here, obviously. The things that are on my mind are it's kind of like we want to give them retroactive approval for the 5 trees that already went. This is like this application is for the 5 trees that were already taken because they're the hazardous ones. And now they just want to take 5 more, which they would have been entitled to. Had they done that first, then this kind of would have been a no-brainer. If they had taken 5 trees that weren't hazardous, then got this report, here's 5 more hazardous, then we would have just given it to them. I believe that seems like everything's straightforward. But now the desire is to take the 5 they were entitled to and use this application towards the 5 that were already taken. And that's kind of one way I see it. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you don't see it that way. That's one complicating factor. The other is the city actually took those down. It wasn't really them. The city took responsibility for it. So does that even then allow them to take 5 more trees? Because it's the 5 that they want, even without the application, because the city already took those trees down. And then the third complicating thing to me was the city right in doing that? And as a set of precedent, because in my mind, from the little that I've learned here so far, I think it was the property owner's responsibility, because it's the property owner's property. City, the roadways are right of way. But it's their property, they're responsible for it. And the city went ahead and took the trees, and has that now set a precedent? If anybody else's tree happens to be in the right of way, they're gonna ask the city to take them down, should they be hazardous or whatever. And so I don't know the answers to any of those things. Those are just, I'm trying to sort through this as to what the right path is. Clearly there's hazard there. I'd like to see them be able to take these trees down in a water line, and their entitlement to take 10 trees, but the order in which it was done, and the fact that the city came in and took trees out complicates things. So I'm not sure what the path through that is, but those are you know, those are the brambles that I'm trying to sort my way through on this.
But for me, the one question about the trees, the city, I see it as a sidewalk, and if the sidewalk is on the property owner's right of way, and it crumbles or whatever, I would expect the city to fix it. Well, I would.
It's never happened.
Well, think about how many sidewalks we have.
I'm just thinking about other counties.
Right, yeah, so those are your concerns. Okay, Judy?
I don't find the order part of it a problem for me. It feels in a way like the application is kind of a moot point, because the 5 that went aren't the 5 that anybody can have. So I don't have any problem with the order part. It's confusing, but those things happen. So in a way, it all feels like a moot point to me, but maybe I'm making it too simple.
And in other words, they should just be able to take the 5 trees they're entitled to.
Yeah. Exactly.
Plan?
I'm just troubled about the order of things, I think, more than anything. As first president, when I was newly mayor, we got a complaint about a tree on 5th Street that I believe the property owner was having difficulty getting their fire insurance or something. They had just moved into the house. It was on city property. You weren't available, so I went with the Public Works director. We went over and did a site visit. He determined that it was a safety hazard because it had never been trimmed at all. So it was top heavy. Wasn't leaning or anything. That tree got taken down on my okay, shaking in my boots, probably crying. I'm thinking we pay for it, but I'm not sure. Another time I was walking home and I probably called you and said, there's a dead tree down by Wellington. I don't know if you remember, this is on Wellington and June. It was a dead tree in the right of way. And boy, the next time I went by there, it was gone. It had been cut down. So I didn't pay for it. Just walking by and reported it.
As far as you know.
So I think the city, I think there is history that the city has paid for trees coming down. And maybe it's a case by case basis, and you know what you got in your budget, and you know a lot of other factors probably. So the precedent thing doesn't really bother me because we're supposed to be critical thinkers anyway, right? But yeah, I mean, I just kind of shed a tear every time a tree goes down. And the trees on my property that I've taken down, I regret it. Just a word to the wise. That's all I got to say.
Russ?
Well, I guess the way I look at it is I think if this works out that the Franks will end up paying for the 5 that are left, then that helps us set precedents that the owners pay for what's in the right of way, not the city, even though the first 5 got bought by the city and the one you found in Wellington did. And I'm sure there will be others in the future, but if we can say today we approve this process and the homeowners paid for what happened in the right of way, then to our legal and the rest of our historical situation, that's a good precedence. And the other aspect, I wasn't sure if, I thought the regulation said that at 5, you need to get a permit and you can take 100. Once you get the permit, that the permit is instigated by 5, but it's not limited to 5. Isn't that correct?
It's first 5 are free. And anything after that, you need a permit.
But okay, but you could get 100 after.
If you put an application for 100, you could.
Yeah.
If that was approved.
Magic. I mean, we're talking about 5 and 5.
No.
And I didn't think that was relevant.
Except if the standpoint, if the 5 that are still there, if those have been taken down first,
okay,
there wouldn't need to be anything further for the 5 that are dangerous because the city would want to take those down anyway.
Got it. Okay.
It's numbers. If it was 2 trees or 1 tree, you know, it's 5 and 5, which confuses, I know.
Yeah, well, that's my comment.
That's your comment. Okay. So yeah, the 5 and 5 is a little strange. But that's the way it is. I don't think we wouldn't even know the city had paid for them before, and I had the distinct impression that the Franks did not ask for the city to pay for them. That this was something the city volunteered to do on their own. So I would see that the city paying to take down any trees in this case in the future would be on a case-by-case thing, and that wouldn't be something for us to set precedent with. I do think that trees planted on top of water lines is never a good thing. Trees planted on sewer lines, the trees are really happy. But it's not a good thing, and I would be concerned that one of those trees was planted in a place that should never been planted. That, I'm sorry, they are ugly trees. They, I look at the rest of your neighborhood, which should be a criteria, but it is to me, and I'm sorry, it's subjective. I don't see these kind of big trees. There's not a spread of them going up and down the street, they're sitting right there. They are loaded with trees in the back. The Franks had said, we will plant additional trees at the future. I have no doubt that they would do that. Trees that might be more native or look better. I mean, not be planted on top of water lines. So I see it as kind of a moot thing like you do, Judy. Whether they took out the 5 dangerous ones first or the 5 not so dangerous ones first and then did the other one. I don't think that we can, I don't think this is precedent setting. I think this is a specific case, and every case that would come up about this in the future would have to be looked at on an individual basis. So that's where I'm at. We've all had our say. Do we have anything else to say? We've had our discussion.
I would just say that in the future, if we have a homeowner who comes and wants to take down 10 trees, that it comes to the planning commission before any trees are cut down. So that we're not doing it. It feels like we're doing it in retrospect in a way. So if staff can help bring those to us, if the plan is truly more than 5 from the get, so that we can be on.
And we know that there's a new proposal to the city council that may change the whole tree removal permitting process.
In this case, we had dangerous trees, so waiting can be a liability as well. So if they are deemed dangerous, an arborist deems them dangerous, I'm going to act on that fairly quickly.
Yeah.
and go forward with it. In other cases where people have had trees on their property, they have 3 dead and 2 alive, a tree is a tree. Or, you know, let's say they have 8 trees they want to get rid of, 3 of them are dead, I still count the 3 dead trees as part of their pot. I haven't been challenged on that. So we try to be conservative with removing trees, but as soon as I hear that they're dangerous or that there's something that can harm somebody, I want to get on those pretty quickly. And sometimes it's obvious, sometimes they need to report. Doesn't happen very often.
Before we go any further, in our findings under F, definition for the purpose of this section, trees defined as follows any tree greater than 12 inches. Could we add diameter in there?
That hasn't approved.
12, any tree greater than 12 inches is what it says. Not that much.
Oh, 12 inches, that breast pipe, yeah.
Yeah, right, but it just says any tree greater than 12 inches.
Right, I understand what you're
And
saying.
so I'm just saying that I think there's needs to be some words added
Where does
there.
that say that?
Under F, definition for tree.
Yes, we'll add that.
Okay, that,
I think it says elsewhere in the ordinance how we're supposed to measure.
right, but for this purpose, I would think a 12-inch tree, then I'm gonna say. I'm sorry, Eric. Yes, you have something else?
Yeah, so is anybody else on the commission concerned with, and or is the city concerned with this, the question of going forwards into the future, when there is a tree in the right of way, that we'd like to try and clarify that. And if we are concerned about that, could we use this this particular case to make a statement about it going forwards? Like, or do we just want to treat every single one going forwards on a case-by-case basis, or do we try and delineate at this point whose responsibility that will be? And we use this as an example and make a statement on the assumption that we approve this, that we make some statement in there so that going forwards, things that are in the right of way for a street, it's the property owner's property. In this case, this property will be taking care of the remainder of these trees. So we have more clarification in the future.
I would prefer not to, but I speak for myself.
Okay.
I would prefer not to make any decision on that. Would take more knowledge, legal knowledge than I certainly possess. We'd be going to Peter, I guess.
I think we gotta just solve their
Clear
problem.
this one.
Yeah. We try to make an ordinance along with the new thing where keep going.
Okay.
And I think every situation will present
Right.
exceptions and will be, and it won't matter what we say at this point.
Okay.
So
You said, Helena, that we
Madam
need to-
Chair,
Yes, Peter. Sorry.
if I could, so I think it's important to point out reiterate a point that was made by Polino, which is that traditionally the city has, Chad's been instructed if the tree's in the right of way, and it's a dangerous tree, city needs to cut it down. So he did what he has been instructed to do in the past. That is consistent with how it has been dealt with. So this is a situation where these trees are in the right of way. They could potentially become dangerous. The arborist said you need to check back in 12 to 18 months. And it's at that point, and one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this to the Planning Commission, that I said to him, I know that people talk about trees in the right of way being the city's trees. I don't necessarily agree with that interpretation. We are in some respects setting a new precedence, or perhaps deviating from, if you do what the applicant is recommending, which he's offered to pay for the removal, we are creating a new precedent. And that at the very least is if a property owner wants trees cut down there in the city's right of way that haven't been determined to be dangerous by the arborist, the property owner is paying for them himself or herself, themselves as a couple, however the application comes in. So I think we have some flexibility in order to kind of further decide these things down the road. But now, if let's say we got 100 applications for trees and people are like, city needs to cut them down, we would be able to point to this and say, no, we're not going to pay to cut these down. And then also encouraging people not to plant trees in the right of way, because we don't like these ambiguous issues coming up, and we don't want to buy a lawsuit. So we don't want someone else to buy a lawsuit. So that's what I would point out.
Okay. Okay. So we're at a point we've discussed, we've talked, we've shared. We need a motion.
I move that we approve the tree removal permit.
I second that.
All right, and just wait a minute, folks. Get to the page. All right, so Russ has moved to approve the tree removal permit based on staff findings, correct?
Yeah.
And Judy has seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Hearing no one, the application is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You are welcome. Now Mr. Frank will rejoin the planning commission. You're Mr. Frank.
Do I have to?
Yes.
I might
But
take
Jenny,
1
you
minute.
can go home.
And then you're gone.
Yeah.
You're going home?
No, I'm not.
Woo.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so in unfinished business, we have the road name process and the naming the private road. We had asked Garrett to do two things, come back to us with a procedure rewritten using the city. Remember, the one he brought to us before was for the county. And we had also asked him to come with, ask the property owners for some suggestions for some names. And I have to admit, I found the information about naming the street and why naming it that very interesting, some history, because I never knew that that's where the word McCall came from. So I did find that interesting. And then Carol Connell, hi Carol, submitted to us very late today some suggestions to change some wording that Garrett has proposed on C, sent by the department to all persons, changing that to the word city. In section 121609F, she suggested she didn't want there to be a personal name of the property developer, the builder, or their personal family members. And I do have to say, I know there are some roads in Earhart that are named after the property owner. Or be a name that reflects, and she wants to be a name that reflects the local flora or fauna of the community when appropriate. And then she asks some questions. So we have that. Since this is under unfinished business, do we want to hear from Garrett first? Is that what we should do? Well, hear from Garrett first. Garrett, you have something to share with us?
Sure. So there's two staff reports about road naming, and the first one is about setting up a procedure for naming roads in the future. When the city finds that naming a road is needed in order to ensure that emergency responders can get to a location efficiently. Right now, the city has a couple brief statements on road naming in its subdivision ordinance. It's typically where most road names come from, but otherwise doesn't have its own process or procedure. And so essentially the only thing guiding us is some statute, Oregon Revised Statute 227-120, and it's brief and minimal. So if that's what we've had in the past. And if you chose to do nothing in terms of adding additional city procedures for naming roads, that's what we'd continue to have as our state framework. It provides, the basic rationale for naming roads and a minimal process for ensuring that the public and neighbors can comment on naming roads. And if you want to establish a more comprehensive procedure, we discussed using Clatsop County's Title 12 as a template to guide us, and it's more extensive in providing staff direction on what to do and how to manage the process, but it essentially addresses the same goals: ensuring that emergency responders get where they need to get efficiently, ensuring that like official maps, plats have and street signs have consistent naming, and ensuring that neighbors and the public have a say and have an opportunity to weigh in on street naming. So we presented you with a cleaned up version of the Clatsop County procedures, and we would still need to decide like where in the city's codes this goes. And you could decide if you want to use these at all. If you think that some of it's just extraneous or excessive for the city of Gearhart, you have, after all, gotten along without it all these years. Or if there's other issues that you want to address. And I'll walk through the Clatsop County procedures briefly. I mean, they start with just establishing why roads should be named. They establish procedures for naming new roads, who can initiate the procedure, whether it's an adjacent owner or the city. They specify the contents of a road naming application. So if the city decided to adopt a procedure for road naming, then staff would develop an application form or modify its existing forms to address this. And then it goes on to specify characteristics that a road name should have, like it shouldn't duplicate existing names or sound similar to existing names, the kinds of suffixes that should go on a road name. It suggests that road names should be based on a historical name or theme. And Carol's comment speaks to this as well, suggesting that perhaps in addition to historical name or theme, or as an alternative, the road name should address should speak to local flora or fauna. And that adjacent owners and residents should have a say at some point in the process. The Clatsop County procedure goes on to provide some basic steps that need to be taken to communicate with various county and emergency services offices to ensure that they have a chance to weigh in on the road name. And that it will work for them and their system. And then it goes on to specify how public notice and notice to neighbors should be given, and the opportunity that they should have to weigh in on a road name in a public hearing. And finally, an appeal opportunity and specifying who needs to be notified of the name once it's decided upon, to make sure that everyone that needs to know knows. And so that's where we could expand on what we have already, which is just this Oregon statute, and provide staff with more guidance, so that they don't need to figure it out anew every couple of years. It would be there in our codes or in an established administrative procedure. And would take it would eliminate some questions that we had to answer, for example, a couple of months ago when we were trying to remember, like, when was the last time this happened? What's the process we should use? Should we follow Clatsop County? We had to do a little research to find the Oregon statute. So it could set up staff for a bit more of an efficient process and consistent process, and a more consistent experience for applicants and owners each time, if you wanted to go ahead and adopt a procedure like this. I'm going to leave my presentation of the report at that. And just a reminder, you could not act on this. You could use Clatsop counties, and you could remove or modify any part of this that you'd like to.
Thank you. So it's pretty comprehensive. However, being pretty comprehensive, then it doesn't leave much to guessing. Yeah, that's what I would say. It gives you some ideas. I do, to add, but Carol has suggested maybe adding reflects the local flora fauna of the community when appropriate. However, I personally feel that a lot of streets named after people already in the city, and some people have been here for centuries, with those in Clark, I believe, and not that long, but maybe that long. Okay,
I agree with you.
So comments from anyone?
Well, the only thing I wonder about, and this has to do with some of our previous experiences with roads that were not city roads, and then trying to have additional properties added onto them. There were no hammerheads. I'd like to see that. I think it's very comprehensive, but I think where we need to put it is where someplace where we decide whether it's a city going to be the city-owned road, or at least to differentiate. If this applies to all roads, and then at some point, where do we decide if it's a city-owned road within this process, so we hopefully have less of the issues that I know we've had several of in the past. I don't know if that's relevant, Chad. This is my memory banks bringing up issues that gave us problems previously.
Some of those problems were kind of the way that they were, some of these properties were serially developed. I mean, you've got the first house, and the second house comes, then they get a third house, and now we need a street name. And so, I don't know, if it was a street naming process that was going to be public and for the public, and for emergency services and all that, I think the public should make that decision, and the public being bodies such as the planning commission, or the city itself. Otherwise, we're going to get a lot of personal names and that sort of thing. So,
well, okay, but is this? I guess what I'm asking is this an opportunity to prevent what you just described, where here's Russ Lane, and then here's the next house, and then you say, well, now we're going to make them maintain this, but there's 3 property owners and nobody wants to, they just say, well, let it be rented. I don't care. I'm the first house. I gravel up to my garage. The heck with the other guys. I mean, I'd like to see that alleviated if possible, but maybe this isn't the time. I'm not trying to bring this into this discussion if it's not relevant.
It's an important question whether you require an applicant to apply for a road name when they represent the third dwelling that will be served by the road. And it bears on like cost of holding a hearing and doing the research to assign a name. I think that's a question I didn't pose in the staff report, but it's an important one. Or whether the city should do it each time and take leadership on the road name. But Peter has a comment also.
Yes, Peter?
Yeah, so I mean, I think people have touched on this, and I saw Carol nodding her head because we were continually frustrated by what I call serial partitions. So somebody would partition, and then the next year they get another 2 lots, and our standards for a driveway versus what would be a road are different. And, you know, what we can require of people there has to be a nexus between what we're requiring and what they're getting, and it has to be roughly proportionate. And that created a lot of problems with these, what I would term driveways. And so those are not something that we would want the city to accept because they're not built to road standards, the city's road standards. This is, and Carol's absolutely dashed my hopes that you would name it Peter O. Watts Lane. So anyway, instead focusing on the flora and fauna instead, apparently. But what I would say is that it becomes a health and safety issue. So once you get the 4th house or what have you, this is for first responders. And also when I was suggesting, I said it should be court, because we want the first responders to know it's going to dead end. So this isn't a through street. It's going to dead end. It's just all that information, like the suffix. And if it's directional on the front, like northwest, it's all for health and public safety reasons. So I think this can be a different conversation than that conversation of how can we require better roads in these serial partitions. But I think that I'm not suggesting you add that to your goals, but in instances where serial partitions look like they're going to occur, are there some tools that, you know, we can deploy that would allow a better, safer road infrastructure there than the current driveways? I think that's kind of an important consideration for us going forward.
Is that Carol's hand up? Carol, is that your hand?
Well, no, but I'll just add on to Peter, if you don't mind at the moment. You know, the one of the most troubling identification of street areas is the highway, when the traffic is moving so fast and there are so many streets that are all parallel there. A lot of them are not named. I think there are some that are not named. And it's dangerous because you're looking and you're trying to turn and you're causing a hazard with the traffic that's flying by. Then the naming of the street is really important, and private or public to me. And then it, you know, from there it's just semantics about some of these standards that I think Garrett's laid out really well. It's a process and it's logical, and hopefully we won't name it after the developer's daughter, for instance. But anyway, those are minor. I think you have to have, at least in that location, just for the drivers and for the safety, street signs.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll withdraw obviously this is not relevant to the.
I think, I understand where your questions are going. I've sat here where we've had developer built one house, then he built another house, and then he built another house. Oh, so Garrett, to you, I think, so say we like this. Then do we vote to approve this, and then where does it go?
So I think I'm interested I am interested in hearing from you whether you think, and Peter, if you want to weigh in on this too, if this should be, if the planning commission wants to adopt a procedure into the city's codes, if it should be put in the zoning ordinance, and we need to look at where it would go, but basically requiring that the applicant for a third dwelling served by an unnamed street needs to include an application for a road name when they do it. And then I think that there's some different options otherwise in terms of like where it goes in the city's codes. I mean, Clatsop County's road naming procedures are part of a series of other codes related to public works and streets. It's not in their zoning code. And there's different ways of doing it. I'm not, I haven't done enough homework to make a recommendation on the right way to do that to you guys. But I think we need to do a little more work on that end. And we can bring that back to you. Yeah, go ahead.
I would just make it a condition of approval on the third house that when they do the serial partition, because it's the same developer does the first two partitions, does the next two, and I'll just build it down the road. I think as a condition of approval on the third lot, that they would be required to do this. And, I really agree with the points that Carol's made from a public safety standpoint. And we're seeing more and more of this kind of on the east side of 101. And I've seen traffic slow down. People are looking, and I haven't seen a wreck, but I've seen pretty close. So I think that the automatic condition of approval for the third lot is probably going to be the cleanest way to get the outcome we're looking for. And just, kind of putting that in the application, is this adding a third street to a residence? And if it is, as a condition of approval, they need to get the street name application in.
Just a clarifying question then, what you're saying, Peter, is that it would be as part of the building of a third house, it would be an administrative procedure, not necessarily an ordinance.
I think that is the cleanest and easiest way of doing it. And probably the most equitable too, because in these instances, we haven't seen someone come in and buy the third lot. We've seen the developer kind of do two, the next two, the next two, the next two. So this would help address like that kind of situation. They've sold the lot. And then someone who wasn't even part of that process has to come in, and they don't even know that they're supposed to get a street, versus the developer doing the partition. They're the ones that should, in my mind, bear the expense and also be responsible, because they should be keeping the future residents safe.
So Peter, does that mean you're saying it would be an administrative set of procedures, the way it's laid out here, how to go about it, and not try and get it in the zoning code, which I don't think is typical in this case. But guidelines for the staff, every instance is going to be a little different.
Right. I just think that requiring it as a condition of approval is and it being administrative. We could put it. I've dealt with roads before and learned a lot, like that the name of the street, I'll say streets because roads denote a directional, but the name is actually only the name. It doesn't include the suffix, and it doesn't include this is the US postal. guidance.
Hmm.
So all that other stuff happens automatically. So if it's less than 1,000 feet, it's court. And that's just to give first responders a heads up of what they're getting into. But I think our primary goal is just public safety. So having it as a condition of approval would probably be my preferred. But we could find a place to put it instead.
Well, so you haven't answered the question.
So that sounds reasonable, and it leaves two situations in my mind, which we have now, and everything's fine now in some ways. It's when we get like a fourplex in addition to an existing dwelling. Do we just remember that we have to do this, as the building permit is getting processed? Imagine that a fourplex that doesn't require any discretionary approval from the planning commission. We just remember that the city's going to do this and name the road. Or where we discover that somehow over the last decade, whoa, there's 5 dwellings here and the road's unnamed. We got to get this named. We'll also still have this administrative procedure. We just have to remember to do it, and follow it and get the road named. And I'm just highlighting those situations.
Well, I think the other part of this that I'm concerned about is we have a renaming equation within this, what you've given us, Garrett. And that should be, to me, that should be an ordinance of some kind. I mean, that has nothing to do with the third house or any of that business. It's just, I want to change the name on my street. City, how do I do it? And then if it's just an administrative part of a building permit, it's kind of lost in the weeds.
Okay, Carol. Are you playing with your hair?
No, I'm sorry. I'm just playing with my hair.
Okay. So our question still stands. This covers not only naming streets that are new names, but when there's more than 2 buildings there or 2 residences. And the other thing is if we were to approve it, how should that motion be worded? Because I don't remember us voting on procedures so much for the city, because you're saying this is just a procedure. No.
I would say that you could make a motion to adopt this drafted language into the city's administrative procedures.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now we looked at this. We had discussion. Did we have discussion?
Well, we have to discuss Carol's suggestion.
We have to discuss Carol's suggestions. Okay, so she had to change department to city, and that does make sense. That is just a simple change. She says not to be a personal name of the property developer, the builder, or their personal family members. This would leave out Peter Watts Lane. Or Luke, maybe. And be a name that reflects the local flora or fauna of the community when appropriate. Do we want either one of those?
I added it to that one to number 5.
Okay, so you added flora or fauna to
be a historical name, theme, name, or local flora or fauna when appropriate.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then when you also have to add in there, maybe the next line would be not be the personal name.
I personally could let that go.
I personally let that go too.
Okay.
I can think of other neighborhood where I know some of those names had to come from someone in the family.
So this is talking about obviously new roads, or if somebody wants to change the name of a road.
Right.
But it doesn't trigger names that don't fit this are going to be, okay, good.
No, it's just for future.
Gotcha.
Right? Eric? You okay?
Good.
Okay, so we'll add in, read that again, please, Paulina, on number 5.
Be an historical name, theme, name, comma, or local flora or fauna when appropriate.
Okay. Nice. And I think that should be a historical name, not an historical.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it's in my. All right. Do we have a motion?
She has other things here.
Oh, she just asked some questions. Existing roads that generally comply with items number 1. And what are the road designated recreation established by Nina? I imagine those are like LA and ST and RT and then she asked, how will this be implemented when it is likely many existing street names will not be consistent with the street naming standards? This is not to go back. This is not to go and change names. We have enough issues right now with post office. Zip code. That's my opinion, Eric. I don't know if that's your opinion, but I don't want it so bad.
I agree.
Okay. So we went with those. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, you make the motion.
I make a motion that we direct the city to complete an administrative procedure for the naming of new roads and the potential procedure for changing an existing road name to follow the county draft with changes we've discussed.
That's clear.
Second.
Don, okay, Clive made the motion and Don has seconded to move this forward. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. All right, so you have it and we'll move forward with it. We have one more item, the naming of the streets. You notice that Aaron Strickland of Pink Windows property suggested macadam, and he gave us some history. I never knew that. But we did ask to get some suggestions from the property owners. Garrett, this is the only one you got, correct?
That's the only suggestion we got from property owners, and then staff had several other suggestions. And I'll also just remind you all that Peter has suggested that we name it that the suffix be court to highlight to emergency services that they're heading into a dead-end street.
Okay.
Many of the other Highway 101 named streets are lane, so it would be sort of heading in a new direction for the streets east of 101. But it sounds like a reasonable idea to do that.
Okay. So this is the toughest part we've had that you liked. Is think of a name for this one. Everything else was easy. Do we like Mr. Strickland's suggestion of macadam court? Or there were multiple other suggestions? Personally, I like it coming from the person that owns the property there.
I like the historical context.
Don?
There is a macadam street in Portland. Not that, but that's a busy, big street.
Oh, yeah.
In Portland. That's not a factor. I mean, there's probably a Elm Street too, right? So, okay.
There's Elm Streets all over the place.
I like the idea of
but isn't macadam and Portland MACA?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So is macadam the guy that invented dirt? Is it spelled MC or MAC?
MC. You know what, I bet that's his suggestion. He has John Loudon McAdam. I bet he spelled it right. He has a spell name.
He's a
Well, but
builder.
then he
He
says
has
later, the
spelling.
word macadam is derived from inventor, so, you know, the street name.
I'm more Googling
is
it.
derived.
Okay. It's not helpful. Cause then we're maybe naming it Schmidt.
Schmidt.
Yeah, something to do with it.
Other people had the opportunity to present names,
Yes.
and this was the only one that came in.
Yes.
Then I think that's
Should we keep it regionally consistent and call it macadam and MAC, not the name?
No.
No?
Got to go about it.
It's better, I want to name it Pink Windows, quite frankly, but you know.
I don't know, that might conjure up.
I know, okay, so, unless we have any other suggestions, do we have a motion to name it Macadam Court? As has been suggested. Because they try to keep it courts because of dead ends and try to get some consistency over on that other east side of 101. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion.
Don has made a motion, so accept Macadam Court. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Judy has seconded it. Any more discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, people. We have no new business. Do we have any more concerns of the commission? Do we have any questions for our land use attorney who does not have a street named after him?
Yeah.
Maybe next time.
So is this our legacy now? Macadam Court?
Yes.
Okay.
It is 7:52. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, everybody, again. Appreciate it.
How does it feel?
That's good.
On the other
Thank you
side?
guys, figured it out.
It was a lot of conversation.